this morning we are going to keep reading the essay, The Architectonics of Form and Content in 1919. And all of you summarized my essay, right? And so you can have a general idea of what the poem is, right? But that's my point of view, right? So you are going to talk about this poem after the lecture, right? In groups, and you're going to write a group essay. Also, there is another poet, which is a very important poet, very good poet, Seamus Heaney, who also received Nobel Prize, but he died recently. About 6 months ago, I met him. He gave a reading, poetry reading at Sligo, and I attended, and I met him. And I also wrote a poem and dedicated to him. But unfortunately, he died. And he's a very good poet. And we are going to read one of his very important poems, very important poems called Digging. Digging. And okay, and also I'm going to, next week we are going to do a new poem, Yeats' poem, which is related to war. It's called Easter 1916. The poem deals with the uprising against United Kingdom, England. Of course, all of them, most of them had been executed, right? And it's a because of this war and because of the uprising, Ireland became independent. Although northern part is still, belong to the UK, right? So, and Seamus Heaney was born in Belfast, the capital of Northern Ireland, Belfast, and Yeats was born in Dublin, Ireland. And Seamus Heaney decided to move to Southern Ireland, and he died in, I think, in Ireland. His home was in Dublin, and Yeats was born in Dublin. But Yeats' parent was from England, and I don't know why, but probably that's why his attitude toward the war is very ambiguous, right? So you can see the Yeats' ambiguous attitude to war and to England in his poem, another poem, Easter 1916. And this is a shorter poem and a very beautiful poem. And you are going to read this poem and write a very short essay about this poem. This is home assignment 1. Another assignment is I'm going to give you my essay and about Easter 1916 and summarize it in one paragraph. Okay, 2 assignments. Read the poem, write your reaction, your appreciation of the poem, and another assignment is to summarize the essay. Okay. And before we go back to reading the essay, the Architectonics, we are going to read a short poem by Seamus Heaney. The poem is called Digging, and I'm going to introduce Seamus Heaney to you, right? Okay. Okay, I'll turn these lights off. Actually, he is a very handsome man, but looks like an old man, right? Yeah, he is old man, right? Seamus Heaney, middle name Justine. Seamus Heaney was an Irish poet, playwright, translator, lecturer, and recipient of the 1995 Nobel Prize in Literature. Yeats received Nobel Prize in 1923 or something. And it's amazing. Ireland Ireland has 5 Nobel recipients. Great. It's a small country. We have never received Nobel Prize yet. So Ireland is a very small country, but they had 5 Nobel recipients. Wonderful, right? So in the early 1960s, he became a lecturer in Belfast. After attending university there, began to publish poetry. He lived in Sandymount, Dublin. Yeats lived here, right, from 1972 until his death last year. He was professor at Harvard from 1981 to 1997, and he was very close friend of Helen Vendler, probably the greatest scholar living, and his legend poets, Harvard's poet in residence from 1988 to 2006. And from 1989 to 1994, he was also the professor poetry at Oxford. So he was professor at both Harvard and Oxford, right? In 1996, he was made a Commander Ordre des Arts et Lettres. Other awards that he received include the Geoffrey Faberry Memorial Prize and E.M. Foster Award, Pan Translation Prize, Golden Wreath of Poetry, T.S. Eliot Prize, Whitebread Prize, all the major prizes, right? He received all the major prizes. In 2012, he was awarded the Lifetime Recognition Award from the Griffin Trust for Excellence in Poetry. His literary papers are held by the National Library of Ireland. Robert Lowell called him the most important Irish poet since Yeats. So he must be a great poet, right? So we are going to read one of his early poems. This is very good. Okay, you'll see. There is a mention of war, but I think his poetry is very different from Yeats's. The language is different. You can see the difference, right? I took the poem from this book, Seamus Heaney, Open Ground. This is a selection of poems, right? Poems 1966 to 1996. I think there is difference in form, right? Compared with Yeats's poetry. His poetry is what? Yeats's poems are much more conventional in form, right? Okay, let's look at the poem, Digging. Between my finger and my thumb, the squat pen rests. Snug as a gun. Under my window, a clean rasping sound when the spade sinks into gravelly ground. My father digging. I look down till he straining a rump among the flower beds, it bends low, comes up 20 years away, stooping in rhythm through potato drills where he was digging. The coarse boot nestled on the log. The shaft against the inside knee was levered firmly. He rooted out tall tops. bury the bright ash deep to scatter new potatoes that we picked, loving their cool hardness in our hands. By God, the old man could handle a spade, just like his old man. My grandfather cut more tough in a day than any other man on Toner's bog. Once I carried him milk in a bottle, corked sloppily with paper. He straightened up to drink it, then fell to right away, nicking, slicing neatly, heaving saws. Over his shoulder, going down and down for the good turf, digging. The cold smell of potato mold, the squelch and slap of the soggy pit, the curt cuts of an edge through living roots awaken in my head. But I've no spade to follow men like them. Between my finger and my thumb, the squat pen rests. I'll dig with it. What do you think? Right? His father is a what? Farmer, potato farmer. Before his father, his grandfather had been a farmer also. And he's supposed to be a farmer, right? But what is he? What he's doing? He's writing poems, right? So, and the poem begins with the same stanza, almost the same stanza. The first stanza and the last stanza are the same, right? Look at the first stanza. Between my finger and my thumb, the squat pen rests. Schnaug is a gun. Voila. This is the war image, right? Schnaug is a gun. It's a depiction of a small squat pencil between his thumb and finger, right? And it's like a gun. Right? What does it mean? There are wars going on outside, right? Between IRA and the UK, right? So there's a war imagery here, right? And actually this is one of the first poems he wrote, and he decided to move to South, right? He must felt guilty for this, right? So, and the last stanza, between my finger and my thumb, the squat pen rests. Same two lines, except I'll dig with it. Very good, I'll dig with it. Meaning what? What does it mean? He is going to be a farmer. What kind of farmer? Poet. Farmer poet. He's going to write poetry with it. So, what do you think? This is the first poem by Seamus, but still it's kind of loose compared with Yeats' poem, right? Yeats' poems, okay? Okay, let's go back to the poem, 1919. Okay. Okay, we have a long way. We have to read the essay first, and from section 3 is a discussion of the poem itself. And this is my discussion, and you're going to discuss the poem yourself, right, among groups. Okay, page 19. Section 3, 1919, consisting of 6 parts, starts in medias res, meaning in the middle, as in John Milton Paradise Lost. Milton Paradise Lost probably is the greatest poem in English, right? All the parts in the poem are architectonic, though they are different in form. When I first read this poem years ago, several images whirled in my mind, each in the poem being as strong as the rest images. Last year, Michael Wu's carefully structured chapters of the book Yeats and Violence prompted me to go back to the poem again for a careful read. The poem is a well-structured piece by Yeats, the draftsman. If Yeats is compared to painters, it is as if Paul Cézanne is doing his apples in his still life. The simplification and objectification of an image, as well as the balance of the part to the whole relationship, with each part seen from multiple angles. Cézanne is the prototype cubist, right? Cubism originates from Cézanne, actually, right? Cézanne painting. Like Cézanne's form, the form in this poem is not merely architectonic, but it's also monumental. On form, Barnes further theorizes, even his landscape have rather the abstract feeling of a pyramid or a cathedral, and in fact, heightened by the clarity of their outlines. The absence of realistic detail of subject matter, the departure from representative detail of figures and objects necessary to obtain the basic architectonic character of Cézanne's design is often so extreme that the inevitable result is the gross distortion of naturalistic appearances, which shocks the uninitiated observer. The distortion, however, when studied in relation to the forms, are perceived to be abstractions of the essentials of objects, ingeniously merged in a harmonious, highly individual total design. Cézanne's paintings are, in the best and most accurate sense of the term, abstract. It is fascinating to notice that Yeats and Cézanne have the same principle of the architectonic architecture of their work in mind when they construct their work. I surmise that the way Cézanne painted humans and landscapes resembles strikingly the way Yeats developed the voice of the speakers and the sequence of the poems in 1919. Both make the speakers and the human conditions impersonal, universal. The process is the grand architectonics, and the work is one of utmost virtuosity. I happen to find the nature of Cézanne's work and that of Yeats respectfully in bonds before I read Wendler. And later, in Wendler, both of whom use the terms of the same root, are architectonic or architectonics. Besides Barnes and Wendler, Michael Wood has also hinted that almost every formal effect is subtly different from every other. The differences add up to the variegated texture of the whole, the shifting tunes and choral that make the work both elegant and restless. That Yeats' 5 different forms in a single poem is quite rare in his early poems. In this poem, forms are different, 5 different forms in a single poem, like Cézanne, right? He uses 5 different stanzaic forms in this poem. Wu's chapter on the temptational form, which is the most important chapter in this book, sums up form as follows. The poem, meaning 1919, opens and closes in iambic pentameter, perhaps the most familiar form of line in English poetry. Although the rhythms are more varied in part 4, the meters of part 2 and 3 are intricate and relaxed, and only some very inventive scansion reading can produce continuing regularity in these stanzas. Parts 4 and 5 return to a sharp regularity, making clear that we are in the worlds of epigram and satire. And about tone and mode, I agree with Michael Wood that part 1 is essayistic, parts 2 and 3 meditative, part 4 epigrammatic, part 5 satiric, part 6 apocalyptic. In this poem, what is more important is the fact that the formal principle of architectonics of the poem comes not only from the meters and rhymes and stanzaic forms, but also from what the syntax is doing when the line ends. Another great scholar, Neuenbach. Neuenbach further says, the syntax may or may not break at the point where the line ends. This poem that is to say, display Yeats's will to architectural form and semantics, which is exemplified by the 11 one-sentence stanzas out of a total of 16 stanzas. The poem has 22 sentences. Of these 11 sentences are 11 stanzas with one sentence. Amazing, right? Which testifies to the fact that Yeats focuses on the architectonics of semantics as well as the other forms in the poem. Besides, Marjorie Poloff, she was a rival with Helen Wendler, two great scholars. Helen Wendler is professor at Harvard and Marjorie Poloff at Stanford. And Marjorie Poloff is she is on our editorial board, Yeats Journal. Great, right? Has already observed the architectonic conjunction of form and semantics in this poem. Metonymy rhyme and symbolic association rhyme. About the first example of metonymy rhyme in lines 226 to 30, Poloff comments, this insolent fiend, Robert Artisan, is evoked by lovelorn Lady Catala to satisfy her unnatural lusts. In rhyming locks and cocks, the two words that have unpleasant sexual connotations, Yeats underlines the thematic stress on violence and tumult. About the second example of symbolic association rhyme, Poloff explains, the first stanza ends with the couplet, and the gone are Phidias' famous ivories and all the golden grasshoppers' bees. The rhyme is repeated in stanza 6, in which Yeats insists that in ancient Greece, no bigot could be found who would break in bits the famous ivories or traffic in the grasshoppers or bees. Ivories and bees are quite dissimilar things, but the ivories carved by Phidias and the golden bees of the skilled metal workers compare the golden bird in sailing to Byzantium. Yeats is another point, are symbolically associated in that both represent for Yeats the perfection of lost art. They are the ingenious, lovely things that are gone. As the form of the poem are fully discussed in Wendler's chapters and Wu's books, along with Poloff's observations, I would like to focus on the semantics of the poem with the structural principle of architectonics in mind. In part 1, there are 6 stanzas in ottava rima. This part serves as a prelude to the rest of 5 parts in the poem. It is an introduction not only to the poem's principle of theory of art by deploring the disappearance of the Greek art, but also a political situation where people are afraid to come forward and speak out, and Ireland is being bogged down in political struggles. Whereas the ottava rima, brought first into English by Sir Thomas Wyatt in the first half of 16th century, it was used by Byron in his Don Juan for comic effect. But here, Yeats uses it for serious subjects of art, politics, and humanity. This part is the longest in the poem, with 6 stanzas in ottava rima. Part 1 is preparation for the next 5 parts. The stanzas in this part are independent, with varied lengths and varied images. They do not develop in a linear fashion, and yet are densely neat. Stanza 1 sets the tone of this prelude and of the whole poem, and emphasizes the governing principle of the world, the circle of the moon. Each stanza illustrates the image of this principle, but no matter what he stresses, the multitude is unaware of it. Many ingenious, lovely things are gone that seemed sheer miracle to the multitude, protected from the circle of the moon. Whether they know it or not, things will eventually go. So there stood amid the ornamental bronze and stone an ancient image made of olive wood, and the gone are Phidias' famous ivories and all the golden grasshoppers and bees. The poet begins with a depiction of the cradle of ancient Greek civilization, a place in Athens. He wants to talk about art as a principle of humanity, not a political situation facing him now. Though they are gone now, there stood an olive wood statue of Athena Polias amid the ornamental bronze and stone in the Erechtheum at Athens, as well as Phidias, Athens, Parthenos of gold and ivory with her hair fixed and decorated with the golden grasshoppers and bees. The art was protected by the circle of moon, but not now. Man needs to rebuild it when the time comes around. In stanza 2, the key images are pretty toys, waxed in the sun's rays, public opinion ripening. The key element that threads the three images is transience. As in the first stanza, we have nothing now. Once when we were young, we had many toys, law, habits, public opinions to play with. They are all gone. Wishing they still have the fine thought. What keeps our keen attention is not the toys. That is neither a law, nor habit, nor public opinion. The things that qualifies the toys. All of these are transient, gone now. Yet all have thought that the worst rogues and rascals have died out. Next time, images after images, illustration at this point. In stanza 3 is depiction of what's gone too, specifically the army that should be with cannons and horses. The first sentence states the condition of what is not here and now. All teeth were drawn, that is, no more young horses bred and trained. The image also reminds us of the teeth and nails with which man and animals fight. Then, all ancient tricks unlearned suggest that the army should have learned all the tactics and strategy of war, but did not do so. Therefore, the great army is but a showy thing now. The next sentence is an impressive image of now. What matter that no cannon had been turned into a plowshare? The piece is not perfect. All the cannons had not been turned into plowshares. However, all, including Parliament and King, thought optimistically that there would not be war. Yet, the army's lack of glory and all the guardsmen and charger horses would not be drowsy nor plans in the parade, but would be in war. Stanza 4 is nearer to the present. This is the stanza that tends to lead scholars to seeing this poem as a political poem. It has a gory image of a mother murdered. Scholars believe it was based on the Black and Tans killing a Mrs. Ellen Quinn, referring to atrocities committed by members of the auxiliaries and the Black and Tans in the pre-treaty fighting in Ireland. Rather than showing the present state of the world, the poet makes use of the occasion to delve into other extreme of humanity under the influence of the circle of moon. The extremity of moon is depicted by way of the image of a dragon. Days are dragon-ridden. The dragon is imaginary, but is the one that brings about terror, murder, nightmare. Even when we sleep, the nightmare rises upon sleep. The worst illness is brought out. A drunken soldier can leave the mother murdered at the door to crawl in her own blood and go scot-free. All of this happens before we pieced our thoughts in philosophy and plan to bring the world under rule. So now, the night can sweat with the terror, and we are but whistles fighting in a hole. In this equation of man with a whistle, we find two states of man. One who philosophizes, another who fights like whistles fighting in a hole. Stanza 5 is one more step to a statement of philosophy of art. A philosopher who is capable of seeing the true nature of art has but one comfort left. All triumph would but break upon his ghostly solitude. He can read the signs and cannot sink unmanned into the half deceit of some intoxicant from shallow wit. He cannot be like the drunken soldier who commits murder as he is able to read the signs. He knows no work can stand, whether health, wealth, or peace of mind was spent. On masterwork of intellect of hand, he also knows no honor lives its mighty monument. He is aware that all triumph would break upon his ghostly solitude. Therefore, it is better to be without triumph, for it will break upon his own his ghostly solitude. The necessity of the ghostly solitude is illustrated in the long-legged friar. Another point, to rebuild art, we need ghostly solitude. The poet has it. It is a great comfort. Stanza 6, which is the last stanza in part 4, emphasizes the need for solitude. The first sentence emphasizes that there is some comfort to be found. We can read the connector but as actually meaning and in a statement but. It is a rhetorical question for emphasis. Is there any comfort to be found? Yes, yes it is. Man is in love and loves what vanishes. What more is there to say? With this question, the speaker gives further examples. None dared admit that the country round, if such a thought were his, incendiary begot would be found too. When the sentence is put in a direct statement, we can find neither incendiary nor bigot were anywhere in that country, Ireland compared to Athens, who burns the stamp on Acropolis, meaning politics, or breaks in bits, the famous Irish meaning, art, or a traffic in the grasshopper's bees, meaning the cheapening of art. This is the speaker's comfort, despite the grim nature of humanity. The second part is 10-line stanza. This is a new invention by Yeats. This part is both the specific history of dance, performance, and the declaration of the historical principle of the Platonic year. Though this part is very short, it is stay against confusion of the world as it is, the confusion depicted in part 1. The image of dance in this part is the strongest in the whole poem. This image, which has originated from an actual dance performance, sags next to the Platonic year, just ending and beginning a new cycle, the truth to apply to humanity. As in the fourth stanza of part 1 that begins with the image of brutality and the soldiery. This stanza begins with Loy Fuller's dances performance, which Yeats has seen. When Loy Fuller's Chinese dancers enwound the shining web, a floating ribbon of growth, it seemed that the dragon of air had fallen among dancers, had whirled them round, or hurried them off on his own furious path. It is a faithful description of the dances of Fuller, and more than that, Yeats has just used the image of a dragon. Nowadays are dragon-ridden. The fourth stanza of part 1, where the dragon is the image of terror, whereas the dragon of air in this stanza is some power in heaven or winds. It is powerful and beautiful. It is like Shelley's tempestuous wind, depending on them and whirling them round and hurrying them off on its own furious path. The image of the elemental power is linked to the Platonic year. So the Platonic year whirls out new, right and wrong, whirls in the old instead. Yeats furthers his philosophizing. All men are dancers, and their tread goes to the barbarous clangor of a gong. In the first 3 lines, we need to hear the expression, whirls out new, right and wrong, whirls in the old instead. Just before these 3 lines, we have had the image of wind through the image of dance. The Platonic year is like the wind that is on its own furious path. To whirl out is to give us new right and wrong. To whirl in is to take back the old when it goes back to heaven. The next 3 lines mean that all men are under the sway of the Platonic year. Therefore, it is the barbarous clangor of a gong. Here again, Yeats objectifies what is the specific performance of dancers. The barbarous clangor of a gong is connected to the image of anima mundi. The third part comprises 3 10-line stanzas in which the principle of art is illustrated in these stanzas. It seems appropriate the principle of history declared in part 2 is further exemplified in each stanza of part 3, with the same 10-line stanzas. Stanza 1 is a mythological poet who compares the sultry soul to a swan. He is possibly romantic. Shelley. Stanza 2 is depiction of poet and the Platonist. The speaker poet is Yeats. In meditation and philosophy is possibly Thomas Taylor, where after that, past the Styx, they are ignorant of their former lives on earth, but recognize material forms and recollect their pristine condition on earth. The poet meditates the reverence that he has made in art or politics, and the philosopher affirms that in the station where we should cast off body and trade, the ancient habit sticks. Okay, I'll skip the next stanza. The first stanza in part 3 mentions the poet, swan, and wind. It reflects on some mythological poet, Shelley, his vision of the solitary soul as a swan, before that brief gleam of his life be gone, an image of his state, and whether to play or to write, those wind that clamor of approaching night. Stanza 2 meditates art and politics, as suggested in the line of a man is lost amid the labyrinth that he has made in art and politics. Okay, I'll go to the next stanza. Stanza 3 shows an image of the swan that has leaped into the desolate heaven. How desolate it is it? What does the swan symbolize? Muse or the art of perfection? Whatever it is, it brings a rage to end all things. In the latter half of the stanza, the poet comes to realization, but now the winds of winter blow. We learn that we were crack-pated when we dreamed it is winter, and winds of winter blow. So we realize we are crazy when we dreamed of making dreamed of making things better. Part 4 is a one stanza part, which is to the force with only 4 lines. Who have 7 years ago talked of honor and of truth, shriek with pleasure if we show the whistle twist, the whistle teeth. When we talked of honor and truth, we were men of honor and truth. But that was only 7 years ago. Now we show the whistles, twist, and whistle teeth. We are no better than the whistles. The twist and teeth, the whistle show, are the very things we show now. We are the whistles, fighting the whole. We shriek with pleasure as whistles. How bad could we turn? No more words are needed to define man than the image of man whistle. This part is, to me, the very heart of the poem's thesis, in which Yeats wishes to define what man is. Man is a being of 2 conflicting natures, angelic and animal aspects. 7 years ago, we talked of honor and truth, but now we shriek with pleasure and showing the whistle twist and teeth. Okay, next stanza, next paragraph. Part 5 has 4 stanzas. The structure of stanza 5 is underlined by the elements of nature. They prevail over man, whether they are great, wise, or good. The stanza shows the object of mockery, the great artists who have had burdens on the mind and work so hard and late to leave some monument behind. Okay, let's go to the next paragraph on page 25. Part 6 as a whole is a metaphor in which the fate of man is compared with a natural phenomenon. I'll skip the quote. In such a situation, the poet cries desperately just when he knows that the world will stay the way it is until artisan and Karthala become true lovers. This final part can be regarded as the finale of the whole poem, both touching on the violence of now and the human visual side of man in the face of moon. The poem depicts the horrible condition of the human nadir. The first 5 lines of 6th part is an image of horses. Violence upon the roads, violence of horses. Some few have handsome riders, are garlanded on the delicate sense of ear or tossing mane. But wearied, running round in their courses, all break and vanish, and evil gathers head. This is an image of an army with horses with some handsome riders, such as Herodias' daughters, Robert Artisan, Lady Karthala. The horses are garlanded on the ear and mane. They are wearied, running round in their courses, and eventually they break and vanish. The 5th line has 2 grammatical sentences linked with and. A colon after the 5th line suggests an illustration of how evil gathers head, which evokes the close, neat structure of a poem. The 4 lines after the colon go as below. The Herodias' daughters have returned again. A sudden blast of dusty wind, and after thunder of feet, a tumult of image, they purpose in the labyrinth of wind. These 4 lines show what the evil is. The scene of the moving army is epical. All the images are synecdochic. Even their purpose is made visible in the whirling wind. The images in the following lines are also quite synecdochic. Some crazy hand, amorous cries, angry cries, which create so intensely chaotic a situation. All of this is according to the wind. From the line of now wind drops, dust settles, the war is over. Then the insolent Robert artisan lurches past, his great eyes without thought, and under the shadow of stupid straw-pale locks, the lovelorn Lady Cartilla brought him bronze peacock feathers and the red comb of her cocks. Artisan is an incubus, a fiend lover who rapes the sleeping Lady Cartilla. Though Cartilla is helplessly in love, he is without thought or passion. The world is calm, where art and artist still do not mesh well, as represented by Robert Artisan. A symbol of art and Cartilla, an artist. The two things Lady Cartilla carries represent beauty symbolized by bronze peacock feather and honor symbolized by the red combs of her cock. Okay, the final part. As analyzed above, 1919 is an architectonic, structurally and semantically. In spite of its diversity in stanzaic forms, meters, and rhyme schemes, the poem has a thing that flows through, a flow of architectonic will to unity, unity of form and semantics. The main principle is that of simplification and objectification by way of contrast, which are opposites or comparatives. This poem is the most representative of the great book, The Tower, 1928, in which most poems have identical themes and forms. Like the book's first poem, Sailing to Byzantium, this poem wills the artifact of eternity, or at least the speaker poet's aims to build again and again in face of history and phenomena. While the first poem is focused on the poet's final destination, Byzantium, this poem ennobles the poet's or man's indefatigable struggles in the cycles of history. Though in varied ways, in each stanza, generally the poem puts past and present together. What makes this poem different from others in The Tower is that 1919 stays aloof from human predicaments by making the poem objective, but that it moves toward the unity of art with all phenomena on earth. The poet in this poem is free to see man and his action as phenomena, part of the cycle of the world. Part one's first and second stanzas are the contrapuntal of the two states of history, the glorious past and the despicable now. But even the past greatest artifacts, ivories and beads made of gold, are no better than present pretty toys. Single stanza, part two, displays the poem's way of objectifying art. Loy Fuller's Chinese dancers, a floating ribbon of clothes, seemed like a dragon of air that had fallen among dancers. The dance is beautiful, yet is transformed into dragon of air falling. Two different things are combined to simplify and objectify what art is, what history is, and what the world is. Part four concludes the poem by silently displaying what man does, awaiting his turn, passively, whether it is love or art, he seeks for good. The principle Yeats has had in mind while composing the poem is architectonic. The principle of unity, simplification, giving the poem unity, though each part is different, self-sufficient. The principle of the impersonal, objectification, making poem universal by universalizing humans and the history, like the landscape by Cézanne. The voice in the poem is objective, impersonal, universal, monumental. The first part is the prelude to the rest of part. The parts to hold relationship in an architectonic structure of form and semantics with the principle of the simplification and objectification of each part toward the climactic moment of the poem. That is, the first part is a good example of this principle, and the rest of the parts in the poem are further exemplification of such an architectonic process toward a conclusion. The diversity of forms in each part is, however, due to Yeats' principle of architectonics, both separate and contain. Yet, in this great poem, there are echoes of images in the earlier and the later part, in the earlier and the later stanzas, through the echoes of forms and semantics toward an end, unity of being. In Yeats' term, as in Sejan, every image is densely, intensely, and powerfully neat between words, phrases, sentences, lines, stanzas, and sections, as if Yeats is following the most famous dictum of Sejan's principle of form: treat nature by means of the cylinder, the sphere, and cone. There are also so many different poetic devices, including meters and rhymes, stanzaic form, alliterations, and assonances. All the images are musically, sometimes cacophonously, and visually, sometimes asymmetrically enriching stimuli to the eye and ear, as well as the head and heart. I agree with Foster that it is a masterpiece. Each of these architectonic measures is an end itself and varied means to an end, the grandest architectonic beauty of a poem achieved by Yeats. When reading this poem, I recall what Yeats, who was dying, uttered to his friend Dorothy Wellesley. Shakespeare is only a master of magnificent fragments. Shakespeare is the greatest poet, but to Yeats, when he was dying, he seems like a what? A mass of magnificent fragments, right? Maybe Yeats is a Shakespeare here in this poem, as Foster discussed the poem in this book, from pages 193 to 198, giving example. To uninitiated seers, this poem lacks in uniformity of form and draftsmanship. As Sejan's simplified and deformed form in his painting looked so. But to Yeats, form is to an end. Form is content in this poem. Okay, we'll take a break, 10 minutes break.